Every argument has at least two parts, a premise and a conclusion. The conclusion is usually the opinion of the argument. So in this case, I should wear a coat. That's going to be the opinion. It's cold outside, and I don't want to be cold. Those are going to be the facts or the premise in the argument. We'll discuss this more in the video on formal logic, but if you were to break down an argument, you can usually break down an argument down to if-then statements. So we say, if A happens, then B happens. And if B happens, then C happens. Therefore, if A happens, then C happens. In a logical structure, the first two if-then statements are considered the premise, meaning the author considers those points as facts. The part of the argument after the therefore, that's the conclusion or the opinion, or the part where the author is trying to change the reader's mind. So in this case, we have two sentences. The first being, this pizza has garlic. And that should seem pretty obvious. No one's going to doubt whether it has garlic or not. You can just see it. But when we say it must be delicious, whether or not garlic actually tastes good, that's open to discussion. So the delicious part is the conclusion. The yellow, that's our premise. We just said that a conclusion is an opinion and a premise is a fact. But something strange happens when you begin to talk about another person's opinion. For example, in this case, the passage says, garlic on pizza is gross. That's definitely opinion, so you think that would not be a premise and it could be the conclusion. However, you have to be careful. Does the author think that garlic on pizza is gross? If that's the question, the reality is we don't know. The author simply tells us what his father thinks. And by telling us that his father thinks garlic on pizza is gross, what his father thinks, well, that's a fact. So this would be a premise in an argument, not a conclusion. So in this case, when the passage says, the novels are indifferent to important moral questions, that may sound like an opinion. But remember, the passage isn't telling us that the novels are indifferent. The passage is simply stating that the critics complain about her novels being indifferent. So when the passage tells us what critics complain about, we're going to consider that a fact. In other words, the green and the blue part are still considered a premise, not a conclusion. In fact, the part you see here on your screen now doesn't have a conclusion yet. So a premise is a fact or a reason that you have come to your conclusion. Oftentimes in passages, you will have reason indicators. Words like since, because, and for. Reason indicators are helpful because they help you identify the conclusion in the argument. If you see the words since, because, or for at the beginning of a sentence, then the conclusion is likely at the end of that sentence. If you see the reason indicator in the middle of the sentence, then the conclusion for that argument is likely at the beginning of that sentence. So in this case, we have the word since right in the middle of our argument. What comes after the word since, that's considered a fact or the premise of the argument. And since our reason indicator was in the middle of our sentence, that means the conclusion is the first part of the sentence. Here, we've got a very similar situation. We have our reason indicator because. What comes after the because, that's going to be considered a fact in the argument. And what came before the because, that is our opinion. So the opinion or the conclusion of this argument is flattery is not the reason for their success.